I'll never forget that visual of getting to Rikers. I mean, we also ran personal expenses through the business and did not pick it up as income, which, as you know, is tax fraud. And we did it for the right reasons. To instead of paying $1 million in taxes, pay half of it. It's wrong. The bottom line is it's wrong. And you justify it by saying, you know what, we'll make it up in business and we'll file amended returns. But it was wrong. Plain and simple, it was wrong. Arrogant with some hubris, and you're right. You feel like, how do I get out?
All right, welcome back, Nightmare Success In and Out listeners. This is where you come for what happens when your worst fear becomes your reality. How do you adapt, survive, overcome, set yourself free? I've really been looking forward to this one, guys. I mean, for anybody who can see, I've been doing just hitting the research on my guest here because Craig, well, it says Luigi Mangione hires Harvey Weinstein's prison consultant Craig Rothfeld. That's Fox, and then it goes to page 6 for New York Post. He's been busy, so we've rescheduled a few times, and I'm glad that Craig's made the time to do this because I've really been looking forward to what he's doing, how he's doing it, and how he's become a player in this arena that's so needed. But give you a little background on Craig. And I want to also, before we get started, I want to give a shout out to Jeff Grant, who actually connected us. He's the founder of the White Collar Support Group. He's an attorney. He does a lot of great things in the reentry world, and he connected Craig and I together. So I very much appreciate that, Jeff Grant, if you're out there listening, and I hope you are. And folks, don't forget to like, share, follow this thing, like it up. It helps the show. Tell you a little bit about Craig. Craig was a former finance professional who became a consultant. A lot of them high profile white collar defendants. And he's done this after doing an 18-month stint for investment and tax fraud. And he founded the company Inside Outside in 2017. The company advises individuals and their lawyers in the post-indictment phase leading up to plea and sentencing. And Craig's also involved in criminal justice legislation and reform, and was actively involved in the passage of the Less is Act More parole reform legislation. And as Craig states, I coupled my 22 months defending myself and the 18 months of incarceration to become an expert on the New York State Department of Corrections and Community Supervision. I now devote my life to guiding clients and their families through time in the New York State prison system and beyond. And he goes into all other states too, but he's a big expert that is a go-to guy in the New York world. Obviously, you can tell from his client base of who he's been with. And I think it's very impressive how he's done it in such a short amount of time, creating this space. And I really am excited to talk to him about what he does in this space too. Before we jump into all that, I want to recognize our show sponsor, Auto Plaza Direct. Who likes spending a couple of weekends walking car lots, looking for a car, and you spend 4 or 5 hours in the dealership to buy a car. It's kind of like a root canal appointment. Well, there's a better way to take away all that pain and hassle getting a car. It's called Auto Plaza Direct. They're your personal car concierge. Just tell them the car you want, what you can pay, and they'll go find the car for you. They'll negotiate your best price. They also offer you warranties and financing. It's all full service. Go to autoplazadirect.com to get started with your personal car concierge. It's the new hassle-free way, the car buying experience you deserve. Auto Plaza Direct. Tell them Brent from Nightmare Success sent you. Craig Rothfeld, how are you?
Brent, good afternoon. I'm well. Nice Friday afternoon, as we both just said, as we slide into the weekend.
Slide into the weekend. Yeah. And like I said, you've been a busy man. And, I was thinking, because when you get involved in these big cases, where it's immediate, it's big news. And then how does it happen? You just get a phone call and it says, "Hey, Craig, we need you."
Yeah, I think, first of all, thank you for having me on. and I'm glad we can do this. And I think this is our fifth attempt of
It
finally
is our
getting it
fifth
done.
attempt. We've gotten to know each other through the process now.
Oh my God. I knew I was going to be in my home office today. I was set. I was like hoping no emergencies, and it's good. It worked out perfectly. Finally, good things to people who wait. So yes, I mean when you're talking about the high profile cases, the phone call comes from the attorney, the
Yeah,
legal defense team. They are the ones who bring you into cases like this.
yeah, it's fascinating. I want to get into all that, but I also want to bring it back to your story, like what the Craig Rothfeld before you were inside outside. What bring us back a little bit? Where'd you grow up? Parents, siblings, where'd all that happen?
Yeah, I know. I'd love to. I'm 54. I just turned 54 this
Okay,
month, and I grew up in Oceanside, Long Island. For the listeners who know the New York, Long Island geography, they're aware. For people who don't know, the simplest way I can say it is if you leave Manhattan, you go east for 20 minutes and you go south for 20 minutes, you'll find the town that I grew up in. And I had a great childhood. Really, wonderful childhood out in the suburbs of Long Island. I graduated high school in 1989, and I went to the State University of New York at Albany. I wound up going with a lot of my friends. I probably could have. I know I could have gone to other schools, but at the time it just sounded like let me go with my friends. And ironically, and I tell this, every time I talk, and I will arc this back. I had gone there because they had a school of criminal justice and
oh
they had a
wow,
criminal justice major. And at that point in my life, I was going to be an attorney. We had a
okay,
family law firm. My grandfather, my uncle, my great uncle, my dad was the only one who wasn't in it. He was an educator for 40 years. And that was my path. So it made sense. And I went to Albany for 4 years. Halfway through, I decided to be an accounting major instead. Took that to started down a completely different path. And
wait, Craig,
when I
how does that happen? How do you go
you know
from
what
criminal
the
justice
yeah
major to
yeah
accounting? Because
I'll tell you
because
how it happened.
people will ask me, Craig, like I was a political science theater guy, and I was going to be an attorney. We got two guys on here; they're going to be attorneys. So my thing was, is that constitutional law, all those different things with political science, but theater, I wanted to be a trial attorney, so I thought theater would be good for the trial room, in front of the jury and all that. But how in the world does a guy go from the criminal justice journey major to accounting?
So I had taken an accounting class, which I loved, and math was. Oh, I hated science. Science was. God bless the scientists out there, and the chemists, and the biologists, and the doctors, and the I mean, it just didn't. But math I loved. I loved numbers. So I took an accounting class, and it was great. I loved it. It was easy. I did well, and it was time to pick a major. And it's kind of a simple story. I called my mother and I said, I talked it through with her. And she said, look, she said, you're going to go to law school, which ironically I never did, but you're going to go to a law school and it's really good for attorneys to know accounting and finance. It's a
Yeah,
skill that most of them don't have. She said, so why don't you get a degree in accounting and then go to law school? With that, you have plenty of time to learn about the criminal justice system. That literally
that
is
was
how it
it.
happened.
That
That
was
was
it.
it. That was it. And at the time,
It
most
came
of my
from
close
mom.
friends, yeah, good for mom. Yeah, yeah, yeah. We can blame her, I guess. We cannot blame her. The my roommate at the time was going to be an accounting major. A lot of my friends were going to be accounting majors. So okay, I'll be an accounting major. And I mean, I remember her saying things to me like, there's good job stability in accounting. You can do taxes, you can
There
do
is.
auditing, you
Yeah.
can work for so there was things that made sense at the time, and their accounting program, which I didn't know this until you got there. I'm not saying this because it was me, was one of the most reputable undergraduate accounting programs and heavily recruited by the big eight accounting firms at that time.
Okay.
So it was like a feeder system into a job when you graduated. So all of that together, we put law school. And I'll finish with this: I could go to law school at night.
There you go. There you go.
So that's
So,
how it happened.
so you roll out of college, and
Yep.
what happens?
I roll out of college. I have a job waiting for me I'm just repositioning myself. Don't mind me. I have a job waiting for me at Arthur Andersen, which at the time was one of the big eight accounting
Sure.
firms.
Yeah.
And, my senior year, I was fortunate to be able to have a good time because I had gotten the job offer the summer in between my junior and senior year. And I think I went home in May and moved back home in May and in 93, did a little traveling on the East Coast with my roommate and went to work, I think around June. I think I started working in like June or
Okay.
July. And I spent about a year in public account and was miserable.
Didn't like it.
Miserable. Miserable. I mean, it's auditing. Auditing is not accounting. I mean, they're related, but I was just not happy. And I left and wanted to get into financial services. And I did. I went to Lehman Brothers. I mean, maybe this is like a foreshadowing. I've talked about this before. I mean, Arthur Anderson's out of business. Lehman's out of business where I started. My company went out of business.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to find some comedy in all this. But and I learned, and I went into retail brokerage and was trained in sales, by some wonderful, great people. And, that started my journey in the financial services world. I spent a couple of years, I think almost 4 years in retail brokerage. I got my MBA.
Okay.
So I should mention that I went back to school. I went to grad school at NYU at the Stern School of Business, got my MBA, and said, okay, I either want to be an investment banker or a CFO. I don't know which one I want to be. And I ultimately left the brokerage industry and basically became like the internal capital markets coordinator for a company. Um,
Wow. So that's a lot. And so, Craig, in the back of your mind, were you thinking I'm going to break out and start my own investment firm, or was it just
no, so at the time, I was married to my daughter's mom. We're no longer married. I'm blessed. I'm remarried, and I hit the jackpot here. But at the time, my former wife was getting her master's degree in Philadelphia. So we moved at the University of Pennsylvania. So we moved to Philadelphia. And the job I took was with Connective, which was a Fortune 250 energy company. It was the merger of, if there's anyone listening in Jersey and the Delmarva Peninsula, it was Delmarva Power and Light and Atlantic Energy merged. And we were doing debt financings and securitizations. I mean, which, for the finance people listening, they get it. For the non-finance people, it sounds like a headache. But I spent 2 years doing that, and my goal at that moment, and just so you know where we are right now, we're circa 1999, 2000, 2001 time frame,
mhm.
and I did this thinking, okay, let me get corporate experience if I want to go the CFO route. And I got the job. To this day, was one of my favorite jobs. The people there were incredible. It was in Wilmington, Delaware. And I was all prepared to become an investment banker at Morgan Stanley in debt capital markets. And a couple of things happened that ultimately, made me choose something else. And I don't know if you want me to go into it or not, so I figured I'd pause. But there were like two formative things that happened that ultimately took me down the very entrepreneurial path I've been on my whole life.
What happened? You got my curiosity up.
Sure. So growing up, like many of us, you have really close friends or, some of your best friends from high school.
Yeah.
And um, one of them worked down on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. What they used to call $2 brokers. They had an agency firm, very close to the family, grew up together. Um, and I'm down in Philadelphia and I'm, doing these complex financial transactions. And my former partner, who wasn't my partner, calls me on the phone and, he was complaining about what the price was to buy a seat on the New York Stock Exchange. And we spent about an hour and a half on the phone. There's no embellishment about what I'm about to tell you. I picked up a pad. I pretty much put an entire financial statement together for him. started running some calculations, and I'm like, look, you can finance the purchase. I'm like, and if you pay principal and interest no higher than this rate, it's lower than you leasing a seat right now. And they're like, he's like, okay, I'll call you tomorrow. He calls me the next day and says, get up here this weekend. And I started moonlighting for them. I started working on putting together a private placement memorandum to raise the
Wow.
money. And then the planes hit the
Did that?
towers,
Yeah.
9/11, and he said, listen, you can always be an investment banker. Why don't we try to build this company together? I mean, it was a 10-person company. He's like, let's just do it. He's like, you could always be a banker. And
Hmm.
I was like,
Why
at
not?
that point, everybody's going through their own thing.
Yeah.
And I said, you know what? Let's do it. And that started really that decision, and then starting in what was my previous company on January 1, 2002, really is the first point or the first block in this whole journey that gets us here 23 years later.
Well, I think it's the reason I wanted you to go through that is because I like this show for so many different reasons because, it's a show of it goes into 1,100 prisons and it's about people who get knocked down and they get back up. Reentry is really tough. I mean, I'm sure, anybody who's listening to this and has gone through what we're talking about, it's one of the tougher things. We talk about going to prison stuff, reentries, after trying to rebuild back your world. And I think it's always interesting to hear somebody's backstory, Craig, because uh, you were setting things in place that really were building blocks to once you got knocked down, you had that built up in your mind how to build that back in. The one thing about reentry for people is they don't take your brain. You just can't give up, but your brain still works as it did before you went through the nightmare. And I think it's interesting that you went through these steps and you then started building a company out of those steps of all that experience you had that has put you where you are, which I think is kind of fascinating.
I appreciate that. And you know what? If you want, let's like kind of take a side tangent for a moment, and then we can come back and pick up 2002. You said something, and you and I have known each other for a short period of time. This isn't rehearsed for everyone who's listening. That you said something that's almost identical to something I've said before when I've talked, is that, you know, when I was indicted and I knew I was going to do time, you know, there were there's things that I've always said, which is, one, they can take my money, they can take my freedom, but they can't take my brain.
Right.
Right? They can't take my mind, they can't take my creativity, they can't take my will, they can't take my spirit.
Hmm.
They can't take those things. So they can take whatever they want, but they weren't going to win. And I've always felt fortunate, so I always hope it comes off the right way, because there's a lot of things I'm not blessed with, a lot of skills, a lot of things, but somehow my chemistry was wired to just never give up. You
Hmm.
never know, you're not knocking me out. And I think that that's the important message that I want to convey to people who are inside and listening to this, is that there are things that people can take away from you, and then there are things that nobody can take away from you, and they're only taken away from you if you allow them to be taken. And I think that that's a really important thing. And I can tell you that when I was inside and I went through my process, of, oh my God, how the hell did I get here? And
Hmm.
then what did I do wrong? And then forgive myself. And then I knew I was going to be successful again. I did not know what it looked like, but I visualized it. I dreamt it. I had, I had things that had been doing for a couple of years working, because it was almost 4 years from the day I was indicted till I went in. So I had rebuilt. So I visualized what that feeling was going to feel like
Hmm.
again. And it's not what I was doing. I mean, you couldn't make this up, and we'll get to that later. But I think that that is such a critical message, is that, you know, it's over if you allow it to be over. And it
Hmm.
doesn't mean it's easy, and it doesn't mean you don't have to crawl through, what. And it doesn't mean it's not like the scene, when Tim Robbins is
Yeah.
crawling through
Shawshank.
I mean, it is. But the reality is if you get up next day, and you just keep taking the punches, eventually you learn how to deflect them.
Well, and I think because Shawshank, for all of us that have gone to
No,
prison, it becomes one of those. It has so many different metaphors in it, but I think
of
one
course.
of this so impactful is that Andy Dufresne, he chips through a wall for 19 years with that vision in his mind of Zihuatanejo. And every day he takes that wall out into the yard and he's got holes in his pockets and he lets that wall out. And that's his daily victory for staying on task. And he's got this vision in his mind for 19 years that Zihuatanejo is where he's going and nothing's going to keep him down. And he does it every single night. And I think it goes back to what you're talking about, Craig, is you got to have a vision and not lose whatever that purpose is, so that you can stay on task with it. That you don't. That's the thing that makes you get up. That's the thing that if you don't have that, it's easy to stay down because what are you getting up for?
Absolutely. And you don't necessarily have to have what it ultimately is, but
Right.
it's that feeling.
Right.
And I think that that's the spirit that gets you to the finish line, is
Yeah, I
knowing
agree.
that and holding on to it.
Totally agree. So you end up, professionally, you're doing well, and you get into creating your own company. Um, how does it get into, or did you feel like you were getting into a gray area? Bef- did you feel like when things happened that you were like on the edge, or was it all a surprise?
No, I knew. I mean, so 2002, I joined 13 people at the company, at my former company. Uh, 11 of them are no worse than like a first cousin or an uncle. I mean, it was just all blood
Yeah.
family. And without getting into all the systematic changes in the industry, we took that 13-person company, which at the time was doing about $6 million in revenues, and turned it into, over a 10-year period, a $46 million company with 120 plus employees and 5 regional offices. I mean, I'm guilty of a bunch of things, and right at the very top of the list is absolute stupidity. And I mean, it is. And when I explain why, the listeners are going to laugh and be like, yeah, you're an idiot, you were stupid. But, so, and we systematically grew it. And that's never been in dispute. And that's one of the things, by the way, that I held on to inside. I knew the mistakes that I had made. Well, I don't even like calling them mistakes. I knew the bad choices I made. I knew the wrong decisions I had made, but I knew what was real.
Hmm.
You can fail, but it doesn't mean it all was not real. There was a
Right.
whole lot of real there. And that's what I held on to and knew. So from 2002, to 2008, to even 2009, we were fine. We were growing, 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 growing. And the financial crisis hit. And, the short version of the story is you had a convergence of trading volume plummeting. And rather than being conservative and retrenching, we viewed this as an opportunity, because so many people gotten laid off, to get like a once in a generational talent.
Hmm.
And that's fine, but when your expenses grow at the same rate that your revenues do, and then something hits the skids, you have a problem. And the reality is, at that time, the decisions I should have made were to either fire people or cut their payouts in half and not worry about losing the firm, because ultimately I lost the firm.
Right.
And we didn't make those decisions. And so what would happen is our regulatory capital would go in and out of compliance. And, so I basically borrowed non-good capital, and that was money that was owed to us. And I made it good capital. I mean, they were real receivables, but when you do that and you sign a FINRA focus report, you've committed a crime. That's
Yeah.
it. The thought process was, by the time they figure it out, if they ever figure it out, we'll have fixed it. It'll be a slap on the wrist. And, what I listen, I never blame anyone else. I take full and complete responsibility. No one had a gun to my head. But what I, do say, because I don't want to minimize it, but what, I do get to say in this situation is, if there's a lot of mitigating circumstances, there are a lot of people who knew what was going on. You don't go to prison for only 18 months if it's what the stories say they are. And it doesn't mean I shouldn't have gone, but it wasn't me sitting in a room all on my own There are a lot of people at the table.
Right.
But you do the wrong thing in that industry, you piss people off, which I did, you can go to prison. So what happened was is we shut the business down at the end of 2011, Brent. We still had money in the bank. Our investors wanted to put more money in, but the SEC wouldn't allow them to do it the way they wanted. We shut it down. I knew I'd get barred from the industry, and I did. I took a bar, for our client, not our clients, our friends out there listening. It's something called an admission waiver and consent. So you basically admit or deny nothing. Um, and I thought that was it. I thought like, okay, I'll get on with my life. I'll rebuild, and away we go. I'll never forget, Brent. I'm in the room with 9 attorneys and an accounting specialist and me.
Mm.
And I'm talking about taking this bar and what does it mean to do an admission waiver and consent? You're not going to jail. No one ever goes to jail for this. You have nothing to worry about. Just take the bar. I mean, it's amazing, right? They were wrong. It's fine. So I signed it, and then 26 months later, from the day we shut the business down, January 1, 2012, in February, we're almost at 11 years, but February 6, 2014, um, the feds passed on my case,
Mm.
and the Manhattan District Attorney came knocking on the door.
You and I talked about this. I thought it was interesting that your case wasn't a federal case because, usually in business transactions and money, because everything crosses state lines, it's usually, but in your case, it was state. Um,
Yeah, and what I don't
when
know
they
what
came knocking at the door,
I was told that they passed. Who knows if
yeah,
they
yeah,
did
yeah.
or they
Well,
didn't.
I no, I mean they
But
as we
the thing I was going to say to you is what everyone says to me is like, what state? What? How is that not a federal case?
Yeah, yeah, no, that's what I thought because my case was federal. It was
Yeah.
insurance. It was in 25 states, and it was no question. But
I think you
yours
know
was a
what I'll
state
tell you.
case.
What the state part, I think ultimately why it became state was we also ran personal expenses through the business and did not pick it up as income, which, as you know, is tax fraud.
Mm,
And we did it for the right reasons. To instead of paying $1 million in taxes, pay half of it. It's wrong. The bottom line is it's wrong. And
mm,
you justify it by saying, you know what, we'll make it up in business and we'll file amended returns. But
right.
it was wrong, plain and simple. It was wrong, and that's okay. I'm at peace with it.
Yeah, and I think you know I've had so many entrepreneurs on this show. Um, it's it's the entrepreneur dilemma too. Is that you're growing, you want to keep the momentum going, you make decisions, you think you can make it up. The last thing I want to do is let somebody go because I value that person and I know that I got to have this over here and I got to pay for that over there. And so at times you can rationalize something that if you look back on it, it's like, well, I didn't actually need to do that. But it's that you can also get intoxicated to the success part of it too, is you don't want to necessarily do a lot of
Absolutely,
changes to things
no
because things
question.
are so good right now. And that's a whole nother
Yeah,
dilemma. We could talk
it
hours on that.
definitely played in, of course. And look, I was in my 30s, so I was young, certainly, a little arrogant with some hubris, and you're right. You feel like, how do I get out? It's as if like um, and it's a shame, but so many people are in that situation that
Yeah.
I've been in. I mean, and my executive coach said it best. She said it best. She's like, look, in the moment of truth, you choked.
Mm,
And that's the reality. I
yeah.
did know better. We did know what was right from wrong, and
And it's
I
humbling.
made the and you made the wrong decisions and the wrong choices. And you know what? Sometimes you pay a dear price for that.
So I want to take a break here because I recognize a couple of sponsors on the show. But when we get back, I want to talk about that knock on the door. What was going through your mind? How you took those next steps to deal with this unknown? Because dealing with the unknowns is the scary parts, and
Yeah.
it's scary. Scary is scary. Before we do that, a lot of you probably don't like how you show up online. There's probably a lot of you out there listening to this show is like, I don't like what I Google when I see my name. Well, many individuals think there's no hope when it comes to managing your reputation on Google. There is hope. It's called the Discoverability Company, and they can help you. Whether you're building a reputation from scratch, repairing your search results from a negative news story, or even if you're just trying to position yourself a little better against your businesses and competition. Discoverability Company can also help how you're portrayed on the AI services like Chat GPT. To learn more, visit discoverability.co. They're even launching a do-it-yourself CEO option, a course for individuals who want to take on their search results on their own budget and speed. Listeners of Nightmare Success can take $100 off the DIY SEO course with coupon code Nightmare Success. And of course, I also want to recognize that the Nightmare Success podcast is sponsored by the White Collar Support Group. It's the world's first support group devoted to people navigating the white collar criminal justice system. I'm a member of the White Collar Support Group, and I can tell you this is a bunch of people who help each other through the criminal justice journey for free. Whether you're just starting your journey or you've made it through to the other side, this is great space for you. You can join us on Zoom Monday, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. For more information, go to prisonist.org. That's prisonist.org. Start here. So, Craig, you get the knock on the door. What happens?
I'll tell you what happens. By the way, I'm going to jump in and say it too, because Jeff Grant's been a very good friend to me as well, and we both share him in common. And he brought us together, and the work he does with the white collar group is fantastic. I mean, it's basically a 12-step program for white collar criminals, and even
It
non.
is.
I mean, there's no, he welcomes whoever comes, and if Jeff's listening, he'll hear
Yeah,
both our
he
shout
will.
outs
I'll
here.
make him listen.
Yeah, he's doing good work.
He's doing great work.
He's doing
Yeah.
good work. So in January 2013, gonna take a step back. We had learned that the Manhattan District Attorney had opened up an investigation. So I tell people this all the time. I mean, it's you're gonna, first of all, in the moment you're feeling one way, and then retrospectively you think you felt way, and then time goes on. I believe when I look back on it all that from January 2013, business has already been shut down a year. I'm starting to rebuild my life. To February 2014 were the worst 13 months of my life,
Mhm.
because you wake up every day wondering.
Yeah.
That's the dread.
The
Is it going
unknown.
to happen? Is
Yep.
it going to happen? When's it going to happen? Is it going to happen?
Yeah.
When's it going to happen? And
Isn't that weird though,
ironically,
Craig? Because I get a lot of phone calls from people because of this show getting ready to go in, and they ask me like, what's the unknowns that I think once you find out, like I got a
100%.
5-year sentence. And once I found out I had that, I hated it, but I at least started dealing with that. I could at least deal with what I was dealing with. The unknown is so scary. And I always say, it's what nothing's ever as bad as your mind makes it out to be. And it's because you can build up so many things, but then once you know what it is, then you're dealing with that. You start tackling it.
You're right. Yeah, no, you're right. And I'll tell you, I say it all the time. The day I took a plea in New York State, which was in July of 2015, an enormous amount of weight went out of my shoulders, because I knew what my sentence was going to be, and I knew what the checkered flag was.
Mm.
And then the day of sentencing, when I went in, that first week or so was it sounds crazy that you're like at Rikers Island with this enormous sense of relief, but it's the reality. It's like, okay, this is really over. We have really turned the page here, and we're now marching towards something else. So I agree with you, which makes that 13 months, the dread, so terrible. And it's ironic, you were just talking about, I guess, one of the sponsors. I was using one of those reputation management programs at the time, um, just from the business shutting down and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And you could pay to see who's like monitoring, looking at you. And it was very clear to me a day or two before, like that's some form of the government was like hovering on my site.
Mm.
And it's like, not that I knew, but I kind of knew. And I was in the shower getting ready to get ready to work, go to work, when they knocked on the door. And by the grace of God, my kids are sleeping. And
How old were your
you
kids?
know, at the time, we're talking 2000, and in the indictment 2014. So they were born what, 2004. So I mean,
10 years old.
2004 was either yeah, 9 and 6.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So they
And
not.
yeah, I mean, it's, you kind of go numb. You have no idea what's going to happen at that point, you know? Um, I walked out the door, the police were like, "Oh, he'll be home tonight." I mean, I stayed in the Tombs, the famous Tombs, for the weekend. I was there Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday night, and I got let go Monday.
Mm.
Um, but so now, yes, you're right. On the one hand, okay, fine, it happened. Now you get a whole new set of uncertainty that you have to try to like organize your brain around. Um,
Did you
so
go once you got your sentence at 18 months? Did they remand you immediately and you went to Rikers?
yeah, so state's different than federal, right? So in the state system, we had a negotiated plea, okay, an agreed upon plea. It's called a promise sentence. You go before the judge, is what we did in July of 2015. Your Honor, I plead guilty to X, Y, and Z. And she says, listen, as long as you behave and you don't screw up, I promise I'll sentence you to 1.5 to 4.5 years. They schedule sentencing. The day you're sentenced in New York State, you go in. That's
Mm.
it. Sentencing day is the day of remand, no matter what the crime, no matter whatever it is.
Doesn't matter.
That's the difference in federal. In federal, some people do get remanded the day of sentencing
Some
in
people do.
federal.
Yeah.
Right, but people, white collar crimes, for lack of a better word, and several other non-violent crimes in
Yeah.
Fed, right? You get to,
And
you
it's all
get to
really up to the
knock on the
judge.
door.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
I remember Seth Williams, who was a guest on the show. He was the Pennsylvania district attorney, and he thought that he was going with his family to dinner, and they immediately remanded him, and that was the end of that. And you never know. That was a federal deal.
yeah. And then the journeys for federal and state are different. They're very different. They happen very, very, and I know them both very, very well. But as you know, if you go into a camp, you drive up, you knock on the front door and say, "Hello, I'm here." In the state system, you go to a county jail the day you're sentenced. Down here in New York City in the five boroughs, you go to Rikers Island. Okay, there used to be some county jails, but you go to Rikers Island. Yeah, that's
Well,
the
tell me
antithesis of a camp,
no,
right?
and it's Rikers Island has been all over the news, Craig. For you, here you are, this guy that's you know up until this point you've lived, except for the the few months of hell, a good life. And what were your thoughts walking into Rikers Island? Because there's nothing good I've ever heard about Rikers. It's like I've never heard anything good about Con Air going into the Oklahoma Transfer Center. I've never heard anything good about Rikers Island. What was going through your mind as a guy going in, knowing you're going to Rikers Island?
So I think at the time I didn't know it, but when the day I was arrested, February 6th, 2014, it was a Thursday. As I mentioned before, I wound up spending, Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday night, so 4 nights and then 4 days in the Tombs, which had similarities to Rikers. And those 4 days actually took away a tremendous amount of mystery
Mm-hmm.
to a degree. So I just at least understood certain things and movements. I had talked to people who had been there before. I talked to people who have gone in, and my approach was just keep to myself.
Mm-hmm.
Keep to myself. Be polite. Be respectful. Don't get involved in anyone's business, and hope for the best. I mean, that's part of it, right? I mean, it really is. And I'll never forget that visual of getting to Rikers. I mean, ever forget the visual of, you get there and there's like five different holding pens, one for each borough. And guys are like, it's as if it was a camp reunion.
Mm.
I'll never forget it. They're like throwing sweatshirts back and forth to each other. How are you? How's this one? How's oh, what are you doing back? I mean, you know, for a long time, Rikers was like a housing shelter.
Mm-hmm.
People would go there when it got cold. They commit a crime when it got cold so they can get three squares, and hang
Mm-hmm.
out with their buddies. I mean, and I am not embellishing. It was the craziest thing I'd ever seen or experienced. And ultimately, I was with my former partner, which was great. We had each other.
Mm-hmm.
We got taken to a dorm. And we walked into the dorm at like 9 o'clock at night, and there were 58 people in the dorm. We were 59 and 60, and 41 of them were Bloods.
Mm.
And you just, you just take a deep breath and try to figure it out. And we did. We found out about 9, 10 days later that they thought we were undercover cops. So it took them.
Right.
They had to figure out who we were. They stole
Right.
our ID numbers. They had people run it, and they're like, okay, they're not undercover cops. They committed a crime. And then you had the most incredible, sort of, I don't. People say the word ecosystem. I mean,
Mhm.
it's in retrospect now, it's fascinating. There's so much to learn from it. So much that's been written, but you had the four highest ranking, members of the Bloods there were stationed in the four corners. And, half the people in the dorm wouldn't talk to me at all. They just wanted nothing to do with me. They wouldn't talk to me for whatever
Did you
reason.
know at that time, Craig, how long you were going to stay there?
Well, that's a great question because according to New York State sentencing law, according to New York State criminal procedure law, the state is supposed to take you into custody within 10 business days, which is 2 weeks.
Okay.
Now, nobody sues the state when they don't do that. So, but you are supposed to basically, Rikers, New York County is holding you as a favor. Every other county is holding. And one of the very first things I guess I learned that was going to be in the book or as a prison consultant was what happened with me and my former partner. After 10 nights, my former partner got tapped on the shoulder. He said, "You're going upstate." I said, "What about me?" Like, "No, you're not on the list." Next day, no, you're not on the list. I found out the judge's clerk didn't sign my commitment papers on one line. So I got trapped in Rikers for another 4 weeks. So I spent five
Oh,
and a half weeks at Rikers. And it was informative, formative, and everything else you could think. What happened is, like I said, I kept to myself. I think people there, like half the people there, realized that okay, I'm not in anybody's business. It's very sad. A lot of people couldn't read there. Like
mhm.
people brought me their papers to read. I mean, I'll never forget reading one gentleman's medical papers for him.
Mm.
Um, and I wrote letters for some people who would just dictate them, who really didn't know how to write. I shared my books with everybody. So I was able to fit in. And I felt really fortunate for that. And, violence broke out in the dorms a few times. And, this couple of the senior people in the dorm would come over. You're right. You're okay. Yeah. And so I felt very grateful for that because it could have gone a completely different way. Um, and, so but it's an inexplicable experience. It is as horrible, from a infrastructure standpoint as everybody,
Yeah. No, and
says it is.
there's a huge difference, and I've said it 1,000 times on this show. There's a huge difference between jail and prison because I only spent 4 days in or 5 days in jail because I was brought back from my civil trial. I'd already been at Leavenworth for a year and a half, and it was the worst 5 days of my whole experience.
Yeah.
And I could not wait to get back to Leavenworth, which is a very strange thing to say if because Leavenworth sounds like a horrible thing. It's in the movies and all that, but the difference is so in jail it's so transitory. You get everybody. Somebody could be in there for a DWI, or somebody could have just killed his wife. Whereas in prison, people are learning how to live in that environment. They're not there for a few days or weeks or whatever. They're living there, and that's their world, and it just feels different. Not that fights and things can't break out in that too, but it's just a different living environment. They're both primitive. One's just a lot worse than the other.
What is the line? What but for the grace of God go I, or something like that. I mean, I look back, look, you're always surviving, right, Brent? We both know
Yeah.
that. Rikers Island is really just survive.
Right.
And you know, with what I do for a living, day in and day out, and the calls I get, I look back and it's a miracle. that no one
Yeah.
ever laid a hand on me, that I never got punched, that no guard ever. I mean, it's an absolute miracle. And you know what? I wanna, take some credit of it for yourself. You want to be like, okay, I knew what to do. I behaved the right way and all of that. Um, but the reality is, someone
You
was
never
looking
know.
over me. Yeah,
Yeah.
you never know. Yeah, you really don't.
Yeah. So you get out of there after 4.5, 5 weeks. Where do they take you?
New York State, they kind of do like it's like a clearinghouse, a clearing system. They're called reception facilities. At that time when I was there, um, the three biggest reception facilities were Ulster County, Ulster Correctional Facility, which is in Nappaneck, kind of Ellenville, New York. That was a medium. Downstate Correctional Facility, which is in Fishkill, New York. That's where everybody that was kind of in maximum security or had medical psychiatric issues. Elmira Correctional Facility, which is up in Elmira, New York. And then there's a couple of other ones, in Buffalo and upstate New York. But from here, you either went to you went to Ulster or downstate. So I went to Ulster, and I spent about 8 weeks at Ulster. And what happens there is they basically, they score you, they screen you, they do their medical, they take their
Hmm.
assessments, and it's basically, where are we going to put you?
Right.
They got to figure out where are we going to put them, which is the right jail and stuff. And I spent 8 weeks there. It's probably the safest prison in the state, because in that reception facility you can't go anywhere without a police escort.
Mm.
So they run it, or fashion it as a military, style boot camp thing. I mean, they talk about, oh, they're preparing you to go upstate. There's nothing about what happens at Ulster, the reception facility, that has anything to do with. I mean, it's like a joke. It's like everything gets easier. You didn't prepare me for anything. You gave me the worst here. But
Right.
um, and then um, they call it the draft. I was put on the draft, right? And I was taken to a prison a quarter of a mile from the Canadian border called Ogdensburg Correctional Facility. So I did 5.5 weeks at Rikers. I did 2 months at Ulster. I went up to the Canadian border for almost 6 months.
Hmm.
And then I started to wait, and that was a medium security facility. The other big thing for listeners who have never been through this, whatever, in New York State, it's medium or max.
Mm.
Okay. The minimum they have right now, they're down, I think, to 4 or 5 minimum security facilities. The only thing that happens in minimum security facilities is work release or the shock military boot camp.
Hmm.
Like, everyone's in a medium. It's not like this can't, the proliferation of camps in the federal system. Like, I went to a medium security prison. I worked in the library with someone who was in for murder. Like, it was no joke. It would be the equivalent in BOP of, I think, kind of if you merged low, and if you took medium and took low medium,
Put
and,
them together.
and all of low and put them together.
Yeah.
Guys who have been in a long time, whose security classification dropped, no different than the Bureau of Prisons. So I was at Ogdensburg. Again, I feel like I got lucky. 400 people, very small, no blind spots. There had been
Hmm.
no violence there in 2 years.
Hmm.
Um, we had cooking facilities. I mean, yeah, I mean, I don't want to glorify this, but to the extent, for those of us who have been in, it was great. And then I was very fortunate. I got approved for one of my first two work release programs. The state has a work release program called industrial training, where
Hmm.
you work for the Department of Corrections. There's a company called Corecraft, which they own, and that was in Hudson Correctional Facility in Hudson, New York. And that began my journey back home. So almost literally halfway in, I got to Hudson in September. So I was in about 9 months.
Hmm.
And then my last 9 months were spent in Hudson and then the work release facility in Manhattan.
Wow. It's quite a journey. Did uh, within that system, Craig, like in Leavenworth, there was the big dorm rooms of, you know, uh, 50, 50 beds, so it's
Yeah.
100 guys. And then on two floors, on the main floor, they had what would be normally cells, but they had doors. So there were two men in there. What was the layout of like where you were? Was it open dorm, or was it, were there cells, or was there both?
Yeah, open dorms.
Yeah.
So Rikers, just picture a big like rectangle in Rikers, 20 beds down the left side, 20 beds down the middle, 20 beds down the
Hmm.
right, like a World War II like
Yeah.
infirmary unit or
Hmm.
something. I mean, you're 2 feet from the person to your left and your
Right.
right. no
Right.
bunk beds or anything. In Department of Corrections, a couple of medium security facilities have individual cells, but most of them they're all dorms. I mean, think of a camp bunk.
Mm-hmm.
Um, 48 beds. Uh, 12 of them had bunks, double bunk. They don't double bunk anymore. They've abolished that in New York State. And you were in a cube, so it was I always meant 6 foot by 10 foot cube
Mm-hmm.
with half walls that came up about 3.5 feet. So you actually had your own little cube space. When you lie down and went to bed at night, you had a divider between you and the person's bed
Yeah.
to the next to you, but it was open. I mean, if
Yeah.
someone wanted to
Sure. The
walk
whole
into
thing
your
is open.
cube or whatever,
Yeah.
yeah, you had your bed, you had a little two army lockers, like a little one that was kind of like a nightstand, and then you had a 4x4 metal locker, and that
It's
was
your
your cube.
world.
That was your world. That's your medium security living quarters in New York State.
So I'm curious, Craig, when you go through all this, you get to the point where you're getting out 3 or 4 months. What was going through your mind on getting out?
Yeah, everybody has, you talk to people about how they count time, do they not count time and stuff like that. Um, when I had gone in, I didn't know whether I was going to do 18 months or 36. Because in New York State, you can get out in 18. The max you do is like 2/3.
Mm-hmm.
I was confident I was getting out in 18 months. I always was. So I started counting days. Like I still have the books, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then when I got to, and I like calendars. I had printed calendars. Some people can't do it. I loved Xing it off
I
every
did the
day. It was
same
like the
thing.
highlight of my, yeah, it's just like the highlight of my day. And I'm not sure I think I forgot what you were asking,
Oh, it
but
was. I was just curious, what, like in your mind, knowing that you're going to get out of prison, what were you thinking about that whole reentry thing of getting out?
oh, that's a great. So my prevailing thoughts, pretty much in no particular order at all times, were make sure I speak to my kids every day,
Mm-hmm.
which unless I was in transit, I managed to do, and also didn't manage to get into a fight. I was very lucky. I had some people who looked after me everywhere I was, and I was able to talk to my kids every day. Thank God. And so that was a priority. I wanted to read as much as I could,
Yeah.
right? I say to people all the time, like, I don't recommend going to jail. I wouldn't go back for this, but there were two things there that I wish, you could sit down and just sit on your bed and think for an hour or two at a time, like be still. I
Yeah.
mean, how often are we still? When was the last time you were still? I mean,
Right.
and I don't mean still like you're sleeping, like just be still.
Yeah.
And you could read. I read
Yeah.
51 books when I was 52, and a lot of them were, well over 1,000-page books. So,
Mm-hmm.
like, in retrospect, I enjoyed being able to do that. And what I told my kids was an adult timeout. But what I kept doing was keeping my eye on my kids. I knew I had work to go home to. I knew I had employment when I went home.
Mm-hmm.
I was planning to write the book. Okay, so I had spent time in the real estate industry. When I left the financial services industry, real estate seemed to be the smartest thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Real estate brokers and property management. I was blessed. I had worked for almost 2 years before I went in. I literally had rebuilt my life. And I was fortunate to be able to go back to work right away. So to me, I was very focused. Like
Mm-hmm.
I was very focused. I was already writing a business plan inside for the people that I was going back to work for. I was already formulating ideas for my book, and I was thinking of my kids, and that's where I kept my focus. That was exactly where I kept my focus at all times. And the visualization techniques we talked
Yeah.
about, earlier in our chat here. Um, I think that you know, those are the things. I had a prayer book in there,
Mm-hmm.
and there are a lot of those daily prayer books or daily affirmations, and I had 3 or 4 of them. There were days I had to read them 10 times a day.
Mm-hmm.
You know, don't play what if,
Yeah.
right? Don't you can't borrow from tomorrow, turning things over, and you know what, they help. I mean, and I don't mind saying, I'm not embarrassed to say it. There were days I literally took it out and read those 3 entries that 10 times a day. And
Mm-hmm.
just to be like, okay, just stay here, just stay here. One of the things I tell clients all the time, and I'll take a sip of water, is you know, because there's nothing to glorify about it. I mean, it's horrible. It's something like that. But I say this all the time. You know, all you gotta do is turn the TV on, and you could say, "Thank God I was in prison and I wasn't there."
Yeah.
And it doesn't make your pain and suffering any less. It doesn't make your family's pain and suffering any less. But it is, in my mind, a way to remember that you're still here and no one knows what's going to happen tomorrow.
Right. You don't. And I think the thing that you just walked us through is that you have to, I think you have to struggle in prison because there's so many things that are out of your control to try to do things that are in your control so that you feel like you're still yourself. You know, that for me, I was always worried about turning into prison, Brent. I didn't really even know what that was, but I feared it. I didn't even know, what is prison, Brent? I guess it's institutionalized, Brent, but, I would exercise. I would read books. I felt like I had a good prison job. That's kind of a weird thing to say, but I thought I was keeping busy doing like I got forklift certified. I would have never gotten forklift certified. Those type of things. I just felt like, you know, you learn that, and it's more of a mind hack is how can I feel like I'm still in control of myself so that I don't lose myself. And that's kind of a weird dynamic in prison. Uh, and I think the people who do get institutionalized are the exact same people who get institutionalized on the outside. It's a bad marriage, a bad job, bad childhood, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And then you get stuck in that world. And, the crazy thing that you see is you and I both know is there are people that get stuck in the whole Shawshank thing where the walls become, the arms that surround you as comfort. And then you become afraid of freedom. And that's only because you hate that routine so badly, but it's the thing the best. And I guess that's one of the things what you and I are talking about, Craig, is you got to continue to keep yourself in tune with yourself, like you said, being still to think and plan. And like you were talking about, you were seeing and visualizing how you were going to do that. You weren't seeing yourself in prison. You were seeing yourself doing things that were beyond that. And I think that's a big deal for people who are listening to this, whether you're on the inside or outside.
No, you're right. And I mean, you hit on some real important things, which is, and you talked about controlling what you can control. I mean, you hear it all the time. It's not some like great trade secret, like routine. Right? I had a routine everywhere I was. When I was at Rikers, we did like, body workouts. I did that the same time every day. I had my coffee twice a day at the same time. I had my oatmeal and peanut butter. Like I wrote my letters at the same time
Mm-hmm.
every day. And it matters because it is the thing that I shower at the same time every day.
Yeah.
The things that you can control. I try to make my phone call at the same time every day. And you're right. When you go upstate, it was the same. When I went upstate, it was the same thing. I was walking and running 100 miles a week. Like
Yeah.
I knew that my salvation was going to be on the track. I knew
Yeah.
that, and I too feel like I worked in the library. I mean, I learned how to like code books. Like when
Mm-hmm.
else would have that? And it got me out of the dorm.
Yeah.
And I love to read.
Mm-hmm.
And people like the people who work in the library. You're right. And now I joke around about it with my clients when we're comfortable enough to do it. In New York State, clients have tablets now, and they have tablets in federal prison. My clients can now make phone calls in New York State prison from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. at night from their
Wow.
bed. They can email. I get emails quicker from my clients sometimes on, JPay and Securus than I do from people in, not incarcerated. They, the education programming that is so available now.
Mm-hmm.
And, so the
It's how you
reality
do
is
it.
that there are more and more things available now than there have been in the past if you want to take advantage of it.
Right. Well, let's talk about you getting out because I'm fascinated on how the going through a nightmare is one thing, surviving it is one thing, but then being able to use what you went through and help other people is a whole nother thing. How did you start stepping into that?
So I got out June 8th, 2017, and went right back to work, and started to resume life. And my criminal defense attorney was Mark Ignifilo, and I'll bring up a few names between here and the end that have had profound impacts on where I am today. Um, Mark was the first, I would say. I mean, he was my criminal defense attorney, and he and Ben Brockman at the time were partners. And Ben has been an incredible friend and mentor and person to me in my practice. And I went to see Mark. I said, "Look, I'm going to write the book. I have, a 2.5, 3 foot stack high of papers I brought home with me, notebooks with interviews and everything. I had it. I'm ready to go." I said, "Would you write?" We were catching. "Would you write the forward for
Yeah.
me?"
Yeah.
Yes, I will. And we talked, and he said, "Listen, I have another idea." And he said, the state system probably better than anyone I know." And
Mm-hmm.
there was one guy who used to do the state who had unfortunately passed away. At the time, there were several very good federal consultants. One who's a dear friend, family, and mentor today, Joel Sickler of the Justice Advocacy Group.
Mm-hmm.
And he was mine because there were no New York consultants. And he's like, "Listen, we will be behind you." He's like, "We will refer people to you. Start slow and steady, and we'll open you up to our network." And literally, that conversation with Mark, and then I think 2 or 3 weeks later, Joel called me and I said, "Look, I got a New York case. Do you want to handle it? I'll pay, tell me what your hourly rate is. Why don't you do it? I'll start to teach you things."
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, "Oh, okay, maybe somebody's telling me something here.
Yeah.
Let's
Game
do
on.
this." Um, and one becomes two, becomes three and four and five, and six and seven. And I said, I don't, and I'm not, what I'm about to say is not me being disparaging about anybody. I didn't want to just tell people, "Look, I went to prison for 18 months. I'm an expert, hire me," and stuff like that. This is me. This is how I'm built. This isn't about anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, I need some sort of education here. Back, remember the ARC, criminal justice major? Here we are.
There we
So
are.
I looked for certificate programs in criminal sentencing and sentencing advocacy. I found one, not at John Jay of all places, which is great. Found it at Arizona State University. Little did I know they were one of the first online, like premier, whatever schools.
Mm-hmm.
And I got in to get a certification in criminal sentencing and sentencing advocacy. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
And then that ended, and I was like, wait a second. People are like, "Oh, you should go to law school." I just lost my 40s. I'm not giving my 50s away. I have no desire to do any of that. But it was clear to me that I could get a master's with, I could take certain classes from the certification and roll it into a master's. And at that point already, I've got 30, 20, 30, 40 clients, and I did it. And, that was kind of June 2017 to January 2020. And then that's when in February 2020 was the first major change in catapult. And that's when the second person who I owe an inordinate amount to in my career is Arthur Idala, brought me into the Harvey Weinstein case. And that's when things took on a different level. And take a
Yeah.
deep breath for a second there. But that's how it happened. It wasn't like I said, it wasn't a grandmaster plan. It
No,
wasn't
slow and
the images.
steady.
It wasn't the images I had in prison. And here I am. I'm 47, 48, 49 years old. I mean, my kids are older and stuff like that. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm in grad school again, getting another degree
Yeah.
again. But it mattered to me. There they are. They're right there.
I see
And
it. It's awesome.
and it mattered to me. I listen, I wanted it for myself. I love to learn. It's who, and I wanted it for a credibility standpoint. I wanted it because I knew I'd be writing to judges and BOP officials and lawyers and stuff like that. And I wanted it. I needed it for me, and I
Yeah.
knew it would matter in the practice, and so I did it.
Well, I think it's inspiring and impressive that you did it that way. I mean, it was slow, steady. You used mentors, you used education, and you continued to set yourself into a position. But where you are is you can really help people, Greg. I mean, there's so many things that the attorneys can't do, and you bring that to the table to help those families navigate a world that is scary. And you know, I'm curious when you get into these high profile cases, is what does all that feel like to you now that you're where you are?
So you set me up to say a couple of things that I like to say. I guess if there's somewhat of the sermon or soapbox part of all this is that
Hmm.
the one thing that I share with people all the time is, and this goes for anybody, you have to, you and I both talked about the whole believe in yourself, they can't knock you down. You have
Yeah.
to remember what you were good at. You have to never let go of the things that you do. And the reality is when the consulting opportunity presented itself to me and I started doing it, I was like, look, I've done this before. I know how to build businesses. I also know how to lose them, right?
Right.
I mean, I mean, like, how lucky am I, right? I
Yeah.
know what not to do.
Yeah. Walk
And
through the minefield.
so, yeah, so the reality is I had that belief in myself that, okay, I can do this again. And I think that for the people that are inside now, people who are listening to this who might be going in, or the people who are out,
Hmm.
you have to remember what you're good at, and and then figure out ways to do that. It's not going to be a quick fix. It's not going to happen overnight.
Hmm.
But that's something that I wanted to say. When I decided to take the Weinstein case on, and now I'm going to answer your other question. I talked to 20 people,
Hmm.
20, not 19, not 21, but 20 religious leaders, clergy, uh, politicians that I had relationships with, many attorneys, friends, family, my current wife, and there are three things that I always say as takeaways from from that. The first was basically what both a New York State Assemblyman said who had worked for legal aid and the rabbi said, which is the bottom line is nobody judges people who work at legal aid and represent murderers, and nobody judges people who work at the defender offices. And we believe, if you believe in things about
Hmm.
society and spirituality and religion, once somebody goes in, they're paying their debt to society. They have rights too. You have innocent families, and you're not defending them.
Right.
So that's one. Two was, you're either in or you're out.
Hmm.
You don't get invited to this party and decline and get invited again.
Right.
So you're either a prison consultant and you're not taking inventory, or you're not.
Right.
Make up your mind. And the third was, and maybe it's the one that I'm the most emotional about, is I instantly reclaimed my story. Now it was my story. It wasn't anyone else's story. It wasn't the bad articles. It wasn't the articles about how I failed. It wasn't
Hmm.
misinformation, which there's some article.
Yeah.
Now it's like, okay, this is my story. Yep, I did go to prison, and
Hmm.
here I am,
I love
and
that.
I'm coming back,
Hmm.
and I'm not ashamed of saying it.
Yeah.
I owned the narrative at that point. Now I own it. You
Yeah.
know, um, I was on the
Because
Arthur
if you
Vidal
don't, they
Power
do.
Hour. Yeah, and I was on the Arthur Vidal Power Hour last night, and he went off mic for a second. He said, "Can I tell people you went to prison?" I mean, it was like I'm like, I'm not doing this if they don't know that. Like, I mean, right? I mean, it's my story. It's
Yeah.
my story, and
It's who you are.
so it's who I am. And so now we're in the phase of just, incredible gratitude, really. Just, I'm healthy, my family's healthy, I'm blessed, I have a wonderful practice. You couldn't make this up if you
No,
tried. I
be a good
say to
movie.
people all the, yeah, I said, I've been approached. I say to people all the time on February 6, 2014, when I was like sitting in front of a judge hoping to make bail, if I had pulled some of you aside and said, listen, let me tell you what's going to happen. Let me tell you what's going to happen in late 2025. But I mean, you forget it. They would have, forget the jail. They would have put me in a psych ward. I mean, you couldn't make it up if you tried. And it's great. And, when I get the calls on these, I'm very humble about it.
Yeah,
I feel very fortunate. Of all the things that I've lost, um, I say this all the time, and it wasn't always this way. It's a journey to get here. But of all the things I've lost now, the thing that matters most is my name. There are people out there who I think still don't like me. There are people
yeah,
out there that I hurt. There are people out there that I let down. There
mhm,
are people out there who wish I made different decisions. And that, look, I can't control that. I can only, I owned it. I took responsibility. I went to jail. I'm paying restitution. I still do it.
right.
Like, and I can't control that part of it. But losing your name is, to me, is the worst. And
Yeah,
I feel fortunate that I'm in an industry now where I am respected by the preeminent
yeah.
practitioners in this country. And there's not, God, I can't, there's nothing in the world that I would want to do to risk that. No client's worth it. No
Right.
money's worth nothing. And so I'm mindful of that, Brent. That's the first thing I'm mindful of. And I say thank you to the point where they're like, stop thanking me. Thank you.
Well, and I think the other thing of it is too, is that, this is kind of a weird fraternity that we're in, but there's a certain amount of pride that happens when, I look and see that you're being interviewed by this person or that person or whatever, because you're also the voice of a community that is coming back, that's being heard, that's doing something, and you're giving back in a way that's helping people move forward. So um, when people step out and they do good things after they get out, it's helping take the black eye off of a lot of different people, because the narrative is always bad, that everybody's an ex-felon, all ex-felons need to go back to prison, and they need to stay there. Whereas there's a lot of good stories out there of people who have made the most of their chance getting out and getting on their way, and didn't give up and were resilient and can make it. And that's what I love about your overall story. So I really look forward to us talking, is because you have that whole package of things that have happened to you, and you're in a good point. You're in a great, I mean, like I said, this would be a great Netflix series of all the different clients that come every, it needs to be not just a movie, just a Netflix series of what happens the week after. But, uh, Craig, what do you think? I mean, we've talked about all these different things. What do you think's your biggest takeaway from all of it?
Wow. I don't know that anyone's asked me that question before. What is my biggest takeaway from all of it? I don't know. I don't. The things that are immediately popping in my mind is don't do the wrong thing. You
Yeah,
always have other options. I mean, that was the first thing that came into my mind.
it's a good one.
At the end of the day, I had other choices. At the end of the day, the irony of my choices is that the choices that I was afraid to make, because I say it all the time, I didn't make certain choices because I thought we would lose the business, and I ultimately lost it
Yeah,
anyway.
yeah,
I think that's one. I mean, I think you have to find ways to always stay positive.
mm,
You have to, it's very much a one day at a time gig. Very
yeah,
often. Sometimes it's an hour at a time.
yeah,
And so, I think that that's a takeaway. And I think that, um, clearly, no, I say this to my clients all the time, both positive and negative, no one knows what's going to happen tomorrow. And you have got to find ways to reel yourself into the here and now.
I like that.
Nobody knew that horrific tragedy was going to happen yesterday
Right,
morning,
right.
with the flight. And you know what? Everybody who got sentenced to federal prison in 2015, 16, 17, nobody knew that Donald Trump was going to be president and he was going to pass the First Step Act. And holy cow, and then COVID, and holy cow, no one knows what's around the corner.
Mhm.
No one knows what's around the corner. You know, you have, we're not being political now. Donald Trump's back in office. We know that he's made some of the most sweeping criminal justice reform in modern history. Maybe it's going to be more now. I could
Hopefully.
tell you in New York State, you know, the death of Robert Brooks, for the people who know about it, at Marcy Correctional Facility, who was beat to death by 14 corrections officers. It is, if we're ever going to get reform in New York State, if we're ever going to get meaningful reform, if we're ever going to get legislation passed in the state that some like similar to the First Step Act, now's the moment.
Hmm.
And I have clients in there jumping out of their skin hoping. So, what I say to my clients all the time is I can say things to you that nobody else can say to you, because I was there, I did it, and I lived it. I have that right to do that.
Yeah, and that's what makes you great about doing your job. That you walked it, you've lived it,
Yeah, I mean, I
and
think the
it's
other takeaway is it's brutal on the families.
oh
I mean, I
yeah,
think that's the family. It's as hard, if not harder, on the families. A huge part of my job is talking to the families.
yeah,
Huge part of the job. There's not one mom or spouse that hasn't cried on the phone with me. I mean, they're powerless, and I think that um, those are my take. My other big takeaway is that if you any light that you can shine on this process, my quote that gets out there all the time is, it's a Byzantine black hole. I just love saying that. If you know what's going to happen, if you could tell someone like, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, or it just takes anxiety away. If this happens, don't worry. It's hard enough. You're going to be so anxiety riddled to begin with, but if you can kind of walk them through things that are going to happen, and the family and the individual, I mean, you're really paying it forward.
yep. Those are good. Those are great takeaways, Craig. What's the best way for people to get a hold of you?
They guess the two easiest ways. Three, you can call me. The phone number is 212-202-5556. I'll repeat all of this. If they have, if you're, well, whether you're inside or outside, but my email address is pretty simple. It's my first name, Craig, which is Craig, and it's just my company, inside outside ltd.com. And if you just Google Inside Outside, or you Google Craig Rothfeld, or
There's a lot.
Microsoft Edge, or Bing, or whatever, you'll find me. It'll pop up.
Well, it's great, and I appreciate you sharing all that. So we're talking about gratitude stuff. I want to say I had this place real close to my home here, Homestead Financial, who lets me use this podcast studio and all the fancy stuff. And um, if you've got home mortgage needs out there, Greg Aftiev is your guy. Uh, don't forget to like, share, whatever you can do, and make the comments. If you got time, I know it's kind of a hassle, but leave a review on Apple. It helps the show. Just go to Apple Podcasts and scroll down. If you want to know more about what I'm doing, BrentCassity.com. I spell it wrong. It's with a TY, not a DY. And as I used to say to my people when I was writing my emails back and forth from Leavenworth, stay strong. I'll do the same. Craig, man, I so admire what you're doing and how you're doing it. And I appreciate you coming on the show today. It's good for
Thank you,
everybody to hear
Brent.
this.
Thank you. I end all my emails and calls the same way as you. Stay strong. Stay,
There,
stay, stay, stay strong. Thank you so much. This has been great. I'm glad we got to do it finally.
me too. Nightmare success in and out.